Now we would like to welcome an expert in international affairs, Dr. Papadopoulos. These developments in the Lebanese and Israeli conflict after the assassination by the use of a drone, a leader in Hamas, Samir al-Haq. How do you read these developments in the region? This is an escalation and this is an operation, different operation. How do you read what happened today?
Despite recent events, I do not believe that war is inevitable. After all, West Asia is the most volatile part of the world, and there is always a very high degree of tension there. But yes, it is true that the current level of tension in West Asia is higher than the average. And that is because Israel is trying to provoke a war between America and Iran. And the Israelis are doing it at a time when there is immense political and civil turmoil in both America and Britain. So the Israelis are hoping, because the American public and the British public is distracted and consumed by civil disorder in their countries, that the Western ruling elites might just sanction a war against Iran and a war against Hezbollah. But whilst a war between Israel and Iran would be in the interests of the Israelis, a war between America and Iran would not be in the interests of neither Washington nor Tehran. The Israelis naturally have a very large amount of influence in America and also in Britain. But again, there are many American political and military officials who do not wish to see a war between America and Iran, because whilst America would eventually defeat Iran in a conventional war, the cost for American interests in the Middle East would be enormous, and there would be an enormous loss of American lives in a war with Iran. So the Americans do not wish to fall into the trap of the Israelis. The Israelis are hoping that by attacking Hezbollah, by killing Iranian officials, Hezbollah and Iran would launch a very major attack on Israel with the loss of Israeli life, thus putting the Americans in a situation where America would feel compelled to take military action against Iran. But still, I do not believe that the Americans will allow themselves to be pulled into a war with Iran. And at the same time, Iran does not wish to become embroiled in a war with America. Why? Because that would mean the end of the Iranian Revolution, the end of the Iranian state, the end of Iran's independence and sovereignty. The Iranian government is a very shrewd one, a very wise one, a very experienced one. They understand that the Israelis are trying to provoke a war between America and Iran. The Iranians will not fall into that trap. And also, as I said, the Americans will not fall into that trap. But also, we see the Israelis committing genocide in Gaza. Iran, whilst giving all sorts of support to the Palestinian people, has still not taken military action against Israel, despite Israel committing genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza. What does that tell us? It tells us that the Iranians know that if they were to take conventional military action against Israel, they would be playing into the hands of the Israelis, and the Americans would be in a position where they would be compelled to take reciprocal military action against Iran. So going forward, I believe there will not be a war in the Middle East because, again, America does not want that, and Iran does not want that.
Dr. Marcus, so regard to US will not be trapped in this conflict, but there are escalating situation in the region, in the Middle East, after the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh from Hamas, and in Tehran after one day of the Israeli raid against Lebanon, where Fuad Shukr is assassinated in Hezbollah. So all of these moves by Israel deteriorate the conflict in the region. And you say that US will not be included in this conflict. So what are the possible moves of US in order not to engage in this conflict?
Let me just clarify something. There are, of course, a lot of American politicians and military officials and intelligence officials who would like to see a war between America and Iran. But again, there is an equal amount, if not more, American political officials, military officials and intelligence officials who do not want such a war. And also, the American people do not want a war. The American people wish for domestic problems to be addressed and to be resolved. The American people are utterly fed up with seeing their taxpayers' money go to different countries around the world, be it Ukraine or be it Israel or other countries. So the American ruling elite do have to take into consideration the feelings of the American people in regard to the escalating tension in the Middle East. Again, the Israelis are doing everything to instigate a war in the region. Yes, they have assassinated numerous officials, for example, Hamas officials and also Iranian officials. How long will the Israelis keep on doing this for? Well, that is very difficult to say. But the Israelis are aware of something, and this something makes their blood boil. And it is this: the Americans and the Iranians do talk to each other unofficially. Sometimes they talk to each other through a third party, but sometimes they talk to each other directly. So a few months ago, following the Israeli attack on the Iranian consulate in Damascus, which killed numerous Iranian officials, the Americans informed the Iranians directly that firstly, they had no advance knowledge of the Israeli attack, and secondly, that the Americans were opposed what the Israelis did. The Iranians then responded to the Americans directly by saying, "Thank you. Of course, we have to respond with some show of military might." And so what the Iranians did was to fire at Iran a considerable number of missiles. The Americans acknowledged that the Iranian government had to do that, because if the Iranian government did not do that, then the average Iranian person would be extremely angry and disappointed at their government. And that is something the Iranian government could not tolerate. And that could push the Iranian government to take in even more drastic military measures against Israel. So again, what we see in public in the Middle East is one thing. What is happening in private behind the scenes is quite something else. And we must never lose sight of the fact that the Americans and the Iranians, whilst they despise each other, they talk to each other.
Dr. Marcus, when the Pentagon says that U.S. Army will deploy more of the fighters, vessels, war vessels, of the U.S. Navy in the Middle East. These supports by U.S. in the region also is an indication that U.S. may have a plan, as we are talking about the behind the scenes. Do you think so?
The Americans are a military superpower. They can move their soldiers and their hardware to all four corners of the world at any time and on any day. They can also withdraw their soldiers and their hardware at any time and on any day and in all four corners of the world. So it is my assessment that by the Americans deploying additional soldiers and military hardware to the Middle East, this is a symbolic show of support to Israel and also to America's other allies in the region, such as Saudi Arabia. But again, that does not mean that the Americans are planning on taking military action. Let us not forget that America and Russia are fighting a war against each other by proxy in Ukraine. And the Americans are losing vast amounts of their hardware in Ukraine, so much so that the American military stockpile is becoming dangerously low. So that is something that can also indicate that the Americans, even if they wanted to take military action against Iran, cannot afford to do so whilst they are bogged down in a proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. But as I said moments ago, a war between America and Iran would set West Asia alight. West Asia would go up in one almighty fireball. The Iranians would have nothing to lose if they were attacked by America. They would hit American military bases with everything.
Thank you very much, our dear guest, Mr. Papadopoulos. Thank you very much for being with us.